Well, welcome back, everyone. We are on part 7, where the Book of Mormon come from. Glad you've joined back with me on trying to answer this question. So we saw that in Cold Case Christianity, J. Warner Wallace, in his book, brings out some good points to becoming a good detective, because he is a detective himself, been so for many years. And so I'd like you to keep these principles in mind as we proceed through the rest of these videos, where we're really examining whether or not these witnesses are reliable. And so he, first of all, gives the principle of don't be a know-it-all. And that's true. We ought to come into this with a humble attitude, and it could be possible that we are wrong. So that's something we need to recognize. His second principle is learn how to infer. And of course, we need to have a logical reason, bring out the logic, bring out the reasonable, make sure that it draws a proper conclusion. That's certainly true. Think circumstantially. Now, what he means by this is think about the circumstantial evidence. So, you think about a crime scene, and you have maybe blood of the victim here. Maybe even you also have footprints of the killer. So, footprints would be part of the circumstantial evidence. And I think when we think about the Book of Mormon, there is a lot of circumstantial evidence, but we don't have the weapon, so to speak. I mean, when we think about the manuscript found, it's missing. It's no longer among us. The weapon is missing. It's gone. But what I believe what happened is, as we proceed through, is that it became the Book of Mormon, and we see witnesses testifying and saying, listen, I've read the Book of Mormon, and I've also read manuscript found, and they both are identical except for the religious material, which makes sense if Sidney Rigdon stole it, and he's the one that, of course, transformed it into the Book of Mormon. And then 4, test your witnesses, and that's exactly what we want to do when we're going through this next few videos. 5, hang on every word, and that's very good pointer, because when I think about what we're going to look at, you want to look at the details of what is said by these witnesses. Please take very careful consideration of what they say. Number 6, separate artifacts from evidence. 7, resist conspiracy theories. Now, I know that probably a lot of Latter-day Saints are going to say, well, Shane, you are bringing up a conspiracy theory. Well, my objection to this being conspiracy theory is because early on, I mean, even from 1831 in, the early months, and we know that Sidney Rigdon, he became a member of the LDS Church sometime in the fall of 1830. The LDS Church had been established in April of 1830, so there were several months that had gone by. But then you have to recognize, it's very interesting how, Joseph Smith, who is in New York, moves down to that area in Ohio where Sidney Rigdon is. So it's just, is it a coincidence that they both pair up together? And then, as we'll see, they have a long-term partnership, long-term relationship, and it's a seesaw relationship. There's a power grab going on, but you'll see that yourself as we proceed through the rest of these videos. Number 8, respect the chain of custody, and what we mean by that is, like we've been doing with Hulbert. Hulbert took the statements of the witnesses, and we found them in Eber D. Howe's book, Mormonism Unveiled, and published. Number 9, know when enough is enough. 10, and prepare for an attack. And certainly there have been raised objections by the LDS community concerning this theory. And we'll look at a lot of those as we proceed onward. So we have now read the witness statements, as we saw in the last 2 videos. So we must ask ourselves 4 questions for reliable eyewitness testimony. 1, were they present? That means, did they either read or did they hear or even do both when it came to the manuscript? Did they read the manuscript? Was it read to them? 2, were they corroborated? Meaning, are there history books that talk about where these witnesses lived? Did they actually live in the area? So, for example, So we know that Spalding lived in Conway, Ohio. Well, did these witnesses live in Conway, Ohio? Did they live in the same time and same place as Spalding did? So, and we want to look at, are there other people who state that their accounts are genuine? Were they accurate? Meaning, the details that the eyewitnesses give, are they accurate? Do they match the Book of Mormon? We're going to see that they do. And were they biased? What would be their ulterior motive? Was it wealth? Was it fame? Was it lust? Was it power? What would be their gain in lying about this matter? So let's begin with number one. Were they present? And we're going to do also number two. Were they corroborated? So that's what we're going to focus on in this video, is answering those two questions, and we want to give some satisfactory answers to them. So let's go back to our timeline again, just to help you to remember things. So you remember that Spalding died 1816. Book of Mormon was published in 1830. Missionary activity takes place. D.P. Hulbert was converted, but then he became an apostate. He gathered the witness statements, in which he gathered about 8 people's statements, as you can see here on the screen. And then in 1834, they were placed in Howe's book, Mormonism Unveiled. And then we had other witness statements gathered later by other people. Now, we see that those, of course, and I'm going to go through this a little bit quicker. As you can see here, I'm going to stop 1839, 1869, 1879, 1880, 1881, 1882, 1886. So we got quite a few of those in newspaper accounts and so forth. So that's what we want to look at. So were these witnesses in the right time and place as Spalding? Did they have the opportunity to read or hear, or both hear his manuscript? So if we want to look at Spalding's timeline, and I'm going to go ahead and give you the whole thing here, and then we're going to stop the video. So, as you can see here, let me just let this build up, and then I'll talk a little bit about it. Okay. So as you can see here, we have the family witnesses. So we have Matilda Spalding and his wife, and Matilda, which was his daughter's name too, right? And of course, Matilda Davidson, she remarried. Her last name was turned to Davidson. And then, of course, Matilda got married, the daughter, and married Dr. McKinstry. Then we have the brother and the sister-in-law. Okay, so we got them. And then we have the Conway, Ohio witnesses, where he lived for quite a period of time. So we got people like Oliver Smith, Aaron Wright, Nehemiah Howard, Abner Jackson, Henry Lake. We even have Erie County witness like John Miller, who lived right across the border, so to speak, in another county. Then we got a loan creditor witness. Remember, he came in to get money from Spalding to pay up his loan, and we know that he got to read the manuscript for several hours with him. So you can see there's a couple of places where Spalding had lived. You got Cherry Valley, New York. Then he lived in Richfield, New York. He moved west 16 miles. Then you got Conway, Ohio. Then we got Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where he lived for 2 years. And then we got 1814, 1816, which we have Reddick, Mckee, and Joseph Miller, who lived there, where he lived there in 2 years. And of course, we know that Spalding died there. So let's focus on Matilda and Davidson and Matilda McKinstry. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and bring up, sorry, let me go back here. So you can see here what it says. Let's look at the first part. So in red, the manuscript that fell into my hands was carefully preserved. It has frequently been examined by my daughter, Mrs. McKinstry of Monson, Massachusetts. And then the daughter, remember what she said? And that while she heard it, talking about her mother, read, she had no especial admiration for it more than for other romances Spalding wrote and read to her. So definitely, where she was the mother present, either of reading or hearing read the manuscript? Yes, it is true. That is the case. Now, going a little bit further in this matter, let's look at Matilda McKinstry and what she says. So look what she says. So she says this: some of the names that he mentioned while reading to these people I have never forgotten. They are as fresh to me today as though I heard them yesterday. They were Mormon, Moroni, Lamanite, Nephi, which those are the names of the characters. All right, then we want to look at John Spaulding and Martha Spaulding. So let me go a little bit further here. That's all right. Oh, let me. Okay, so you can see here. Look at what John Spaulding said. He then told me he had been writing a book of which he read to me many passages. So he was present. Look at what Martha says. I was personally acquainted with Solomon Spaulding. I was at his house a short time before he left Conway. And she talks about, I have no manner of doubt that the historical part of it is the same that I read and heard read more than 20 years ago. So was she present? Certainly. All right, going a little bit further. Look at also what the mother said. Mr. Solomon Spaulding had a brother, Mr. John Spaulding, residing in the place at the time, who was perfectly familiar with this work and repeatedly heard the whole of it read. All right, so when we think about the present here, were they present? Yes, Matilda Davison definitely fits that category. Also the daughter, and John Spaulding and Matilda Spaulding do as well. All right, we want to ask ourselves, so we go a little bit further. I want to just go ahead and go to, if it's all right, I'm going to show this. All right, so what I'm focusing on now, we got the family witnesses. Now we're looking at the Conway, Ohio witnesses. Were they present when Spaulding was able to read their manuscript read his manuscript to them, or did they read the manuscript? So let's look at what it said. So Aaron Wright says the historical part of the Book of Mormon I know to be the same as I read and heard read from the writings of Spaulding more than 20 years ago. Notice what Nehemiah Howard says, and I'm going to go ahead and skip just a little bit. That's all right. And, okay, and we'll stop there. So Nehemiah Howard afterwards frequently showed me his writings, which I read. Oliver Smith, during the time he was at my house, I read and heard read 100 pages or more. Henry Lake, I spent many hours in hearing him read said writings and became well acquainted with its contents. All right, going a little bit further. Let's look at what John Miller and R.M.S. Cunningham say. So I'm going to go a little bit further here. So John Miller says, while there, I boarded and lodged in the family of said Spaulding for several months, and I was soon introduced to the manuscript of Spaulding and perused them as often as I had leisure. So, and from this, he would frequently read some humorous passages to the company present. Sorry, I did not highlight that in red. Should have. R.M.S. Cunningham, he then presented his manuscripts when we sat down and spent a good share of the night in reading them and conversing upon them. Then Abner Jackson, let's see what he says. This romance Mr. Spaulding brought with him on a visit to my father a short time before he moved from Conway to Pittsburgh. At that time, I was confined to the house with a lame knee, and so I was in company with them and heard the conversation that passed between them. So you can see there, definitely they read. Now, when you think about what we have with these Conway, Ohio witnesses, friends, I want you to see from this timeline that they did live in the same time and in the same place when Spaulding lived in Conway, Ohio. So I want you to see when they lived and when they died. So Nehemiah Howard, 1773 to 1841. He arrived in Conway in 1810. Aaron Wright lived from 1775 to 1853. He settled in Conway in 1799. John Miller, 1782 to 1866. He lived in Erie County, Pennsylvania. And I'm just showing you here some of the gravestones. There's Howard's gravestone. There's Aaron Wright's gravestone. And also John Miller's gravestone. And I just want you to notice that he lives in Erie County, Pennsylvania. And as you can see here, you can see where that's located. So you see Conway, Ohio, or Ashtabula County, Ohio on the left. And on the right is Erie County, Pennsylvania. So not far at all, right? All right, going a little bit further. So what I want you to see here, Oliver Smith, he lived from 1761 to 1838, and he's shown as living in Springfield, uh, and then Erie County, Pennsylvania, in the 1810, 1820, 1830 federal census returns. And then Henry Lake, 1772 to 1850, settled in Conway, January 1st, 1811. And I want you to see that business agreement that's coming up. Show you the evidence for that. And then Artemus Cunningham, the one who gave the loan, 1782 to 1839, and he lived in Peary or Geauga County, Ohio. So there's Oliver Smith's grave there. We actually have Zappa Lake Family Bible, so you can look at that if you like. And gives birth and death dates of the Lake family. And then Artemis Cunningham, I just want to show you where Peary, Ohio is located. So you can see there how far it's located from Conway, Ohio. All right, going a little bit further in time. So John Spaulding lived from 1774 to 1857. Martha Spalding, it is believed, lived sometime between, it's kind of hard to find her dates, 1746, estimated between 1746 and 1802, but she died in 1864. She lived close to John Miller. And this is what the daughter of John Miller says, Rachel Derby. She says, John Spalding, Solomon's brother, lived half a mile from our house, and our families were quite intimate. So that's why he knew, that's probably why John Spalding could point to him later on and say, gather his witness statement. Then we have, of course, let me just go a little bit further here. So remember 1833. So that's the right, were some of those witnesses living at that time? And we find that yes, that is the case. The Spalding witnesses did live during the right time period, locations, 1809, 1812, being with Spalding, and 1833 when the witness statements were written down by Hulbert. So we're asking ourselves, are these people, were they present? And when you look at everything, it would be the case that they were indeed present, where they could read the manuscript and or hear the manuscript read. So all of those pass that, my friends. Now we're going to look at Joseph Miller and Reddick Mckee. So you'll remember that. Let me go ahead and show you the dates of this, if that's all right. So as you can see here, I forgot to give Abner Jackson, I believe. Abner Jackson lived from 1795 to 1888, so quite a number of years, didn't he? But Matilda Davidson, 1767 to 1846, Joseph Miller from 1791 to 1885, Reddick Mckee, 1800 to 1886, McKinstry, 1805 to 1891. So, as you can see there, their statements could have been written down because 1839 all the way even to 1886. That would, we know that Wright Mckee died a few months after giving that last witness statement. So this does fit the timeline. So a person can find these witness statements in the designated newspapers, etc., that have already been mentioned in our previous videos. Now, maybe a little bit further, let's look at were they present? Okay, so look at what is said. John Miller, and I'm sorry for spelling his name wrong, it was in the style of a novel, well written, and I and others would frequently sit and listen to his reading of it. His manuscript was written on loose sheets of paper with a pen. I nursed him in his last sickness, made his coffin. Mckee, I read or heard him read many wonderful and amusing passages from different parts of his professed historical records, and was struck with the minuteness of his details and the apparent truthfulness and sincerity of the author. So, when we look at these statements, my friends, I mean, they all witnesses passed that first test there. The Conway, Ohio witnesses, the family witnesses, and even those who lived in Amity, Pennsylvania. Now, were they present? We've found out the answer is yes. Were they corroborated? That's our second question we want to answer. Is there additional support that can back up the eyewitness statements? So let's take a look closely at this. So I'm going to skip a little bit further, if that's all right. So, do you remember our timeline? We're, of course, seeing that the family witnesses would have lived with Solomon in Cherry Valley, New York, and also Richfield, New York, right? And then they would, of course, move to Conway, Ohio with him. I'm sorry. I take that back. I'm sorry. Matilda Davidson, his wife, would have lived in Cherry Valley and Richfield, and then later on, we know that Matilda, the daughter, she would have 1805 or 1806, so she was there in Conway. Okay. And then, of course, they would have lived with him in Pittsburgh, and they also would have lived with him in Amity, Pennsylvania. Now, I want you to notice the detail that the widow gave. Remember, she says, this sole object, Solomon's sole object in writing this historical romance was to amuse himself and his neighbors. This was about the year 1812. Notice the detail she gives. Hall's surrender at Detroit occurred near the same time, and I recollect the date well from that circumstance. And indeed, that took place on August 16th, 1812. So that does fit the timeline. Now, when we think about D.P. Hulbert visited the right person who had Spalding's writings, the first manuscript. The widow told where he could find the exact location of the first manuscript, Jerome Clark's place. There were other witnesses who knew she was Spalding's wife, and she had lived with her adopted daughter in Monson, Massachusetts. So, I mean, it fits exactly right. Circumstances there. And then the daughter says, during the War of 1812, I was residing with my parents in a little town in Ohio called Conway. He frequently wrote little stories which he read to me. There were sermons in other papers, and I saw a manuscript about an inch thick, closely written, tied with some of the stories my father had written for me, one of which he called The Frogs of Windham. That's very interesting because in the book written by Cowdery and Vanek and others called The Spaulding Enigma, I believe it's titled, or Where Did the Book of Mormon Really Come From? I believe it's in the updated edition, though, that they talk about the Frogs of Windham. And I found it interesting what they said about this. They said that these three authors found a book entitled The Battle of the Frogs at Windham, 1758, with various accounts and three of the most popular ballads on the subject, with introduction by William Weaver, and published by James Walden of Willimantic, Connecticut in 1857. Various poems and stories about the supposed battle that took place in 1758 were written down later. There is a poem on pages 13 through 17 called The Frogs of Windham, an old colony tale founded on fact by Arian. And that's a pseudonym or a pen name. It derives from Arian Methemna. He lived in 625 BC. So this person had to have a classical education. And the Arian version employs the exact title as Matilda stated. Source was from an old Providence Gazette newspaper in Rhode Island, ceased publication in October of 1825. It was Revolutionary War connection. because of the phrase good clothing, pay, and rations. And Spalding went to Wyndham, Connecticut, where he studied law under Swift for some time. So, there's possible circumstantial evidence. And excuse me. We see that the source from the Old Providence Gazette in Rhode Island. So, it's possible. Sometimes newspapers articles will pick up other newspaper articles and put it in their newspaper. So it's very possible that this could be related to Spalding in some way, because he was in the Revolutionary War. All right, going a little bit further. John Spalding. Now, this is very interesting here. So this is an 1811 New Salem or Conway, Ohio voter list, and it was compiled by Nehemiah King. And so it's very interesting what we see on it. And I'm going to put it here. So we got Nahum Howard. Now, I haven't brought up Nehemiah King, but Nehemiah King was one of the ones. You see, he had died. He was one of the townspeople of Conway, Ohio. He had died before Hobart could take down the witness statements. I don't remember when he died, to be honest. But he was one of the ones who heard the Mormon missionaries. And he made the connection between Solomon Spaulding and manuscript found. And he must have told Aaron Wright, or maybe even Aaron Wright agreed with him, because he also heard it and made the connection as well. Of course, but then there's Henry Lake, and so I want to bring those up, but I want to show you. Of course, we're looking primarily at John Spalding, and as you can see there, isn't that interesting? John Spalding, Solomon Spaulding, and Aaron Wright. All right, and then here are the lists of letters that if you didn't come pick up your mail, they would put your name in the newspaper so that you would come and get it. So here we have Solomon Spaulding mentioned. That May 1st, 1813. Of course, that's in Pittsburgh. So just to let y'all know about that. So here it says February 1st, 1815. And notice who's on the list: John Spalding and Solomon Spaulding. So just to let y'all know about that. This is February 1st, February 11th, 1815. Then we got February 25th, 1815. So, as you can see, John Spalding was able to be with Solomon Spaulding, and definitely it's corroborated, right? There is additional support for that. So we got all these people here, and I believe that we can see that they are indeed corroborated. Definitely, of course, being present. And as we've seen, the family witnesses are indeed corroborated. Now I want to look at the timeline once again. So what I want to look at is the Conway, Ohio witnesses. I want to look at the co-worker witnesses who helped win the forge. And I also want to help with the loan creditor witness, Artemis. So let's go a little bit further. So let me go ahead and skip a little bit further. Oh, sorry about that. All right, so this is what Oliver Smith said. While engaged in this business, he boarded at my house in all nearly 6 months. All his leisure hours were occupied in writing a historical novel. During the time he was at my house, I read 100 pages or more. And so Spalding probably boarded with Oliver Smith late 1809 to early 1810. Oliver Smith witnessed a transaction Spalding made on a land transaction agreement between Spalding and Hananiah Brooks, October 22nd, 1806, and you can visit that website for more information on that matter. Then we have Aaron Wright. Now, this is what Aaron Wright, this is written in a history book on Ashtabula County, Ohio. On page 156, it says the year 1798 marks the date of the first permanent settlement in the township. The names of these pioneers were Thomas Montgomery with his family and Aaron Wright. They were moved in this year from Harpersfield in the state of New York, intending to settle in Harpersfield Township, where some of their friends I have taken up their abode the previous year. But arriving at Conway, they were so delighted with the country and the facilities it afforded for getting in crops that they decided to make this township their home. And there's also an unsigned letter of Aaron Wright, 1833, which we mentioned in previous videos, that Holbert had taken down. Then there's even Wright's docket book, and you can visit the website and find that. There's also, he mentions Henry Lake, Nahum Howard, Oliver Smith. We have Wright's 1841 sketch, historical sketch, and you can read about that if you'd like. It's very interesting to read that at that particular website address. Harvey Nettleton was the author, and he wrote in the Geneva Times. Now you can read this yourself. I just want to get to the important part here in red. So they say, sorry, let me go a little further. Yeah, these impressions on a thorough examination made by Esquire Aaron Wright as early as 1800. Talking about these graves and stuff. So, also on page 157, William Williams wrote in his book, and I'm just going to let it build up. Okay. In 1809, David, Joseph, James, and Stephen Hicks, brothers, arrived in Conway, settled in the western portion of the township, near the present site of the Amboy Cheese Factory. They also came from Canada, the natives of Vermont. In 1910, Henry Lake and Dr. Nahum Howard and family settled in Conway. Dr. Howard was from Kennebec County, Maine. He settled near the site of the present residence of P.M. Darling on Harbor Street. Mr. Lake was a native of Vermont. He started the first furnace in Conway on the flats of the creek, a short distance above the paper mills. He was afterwards landlord of the old mansion house. All right, looking at Abner Jackson. He then came to Richfield, talking about Spalding, near where my father lived. Started a store near where my father lived. My father exchanged with him the farm on which he lived in Otesco County, New York, for land in Erie County, Pennsylvania, where the town of Albion now stands, and moved on it A.D. 1805. At that time, I was confined to the house with a lame knee, so I was in company with them and heard the conversation that passed between them. Spalding read much of his manuscript to my father, and in conversation with him explained his views of the old fortifications in this country and told his romance. Now, we already kind of saw some corroboration with Henry Lake, mentioned in that history book. But we also have from Henry Lake the March 1811 agreement between Spalding and Lake. So, as you can see here, articles agreement entered into between Solomon Spalding of Salem and the county of Ashtabula, state of Ohio, and the first part of Henry Lake of Buffalo in the county of Niagara, state of New York, of the second part, witnesseth that for the consideration of $480, that the said Spalding hath sold unto the said Lake the one half of a certain tract of land adjoining his forge dam, together with the one half of said dam and the pond, and the privilege of joining him in equal partnership to erect a forge, and it mentions those who witness unto it. And I want you to check back to the section on Aaron Wright where Lake is mentioned. Also. So we got that corroboration as well. Then we got John Miller. Now we have his daughter's testimony here. So she says, my father, John Miller, settled in Springfield, Erie County, Pennsylvania, near Conway in 1800. He was an elder of the Presbyterian Church over 30 years. His father was before him. I have many times heard father say that in 1811 he and Andrew Cochran helped build a forge or furnace for General Keyes at Conway, Ohio. They boarded with Solomon Spaulding, who had been a preacher, but his wife was not religious. She was high-strung, a frolicker, fond of balls and parties, drove him out of the ministry. He said he liked Spalding. While they were at their meals, Spalding would lie on the bed and read to them his manuscripts. Father also frequently read them himself. I have often heard him tell about the Nephites and Zarahemlites before the Book of Mormon was published. I remember D.P. Hobart coming to our house about 50 years ago, and his telling Father that he was taking evidence to expose Mormonism and hearing him read from the Book of Mormon. Frequently, Father would request Hobart to stop reading, and he would state what followed, and Hobart would say that it was so in the Book of Mormon. He expressed great surprise that Father remembered so much of it. Father told him that the manuscript found was not near all of Spalding's writings, and that probably there would soon be another prophecy out. Father said he had no doubt that the historical part of the Book of Mormon was Spalding's manuscript found. John Spalding, Solomon's brother, lived half a mile from our house, and our families were quite intimate. I saw Father sign a statement and give Hobart. He had statements from Henry Lake, Aaron Wright, and Dr. Howard of Conway. Hobart stayed 2 nights with a Mormon woman of very bad character who lived alone. Several of the lowest families in Springfield became Mormons. Mr. Hartshorn, a Mormon whose wife was a Methodist, did not go west, but he insisted, and she hung herself on the way. All right, now we want to look at Artemis Cunningham and what is said. So we have an 1810, 1816 tax list for Ashtabula County. And I just want to show you what is said here so you can see. Artemis Cunningham is mentioned on the list. You even have Nehemiah Howard. We have Nehemiah King. We got Aaron Wright. And so you can see there. The 1811 also New Zealand voter list, of which Nehemiah Howard, Nehemiah King, Henry Lake are on that. And we have John Spalding, Solomon Spalding, Aaron Wright. And then this is 1819. So it says an alphabetical list of white male inhabitants of 21 years of age and upwards in Salem, 1819. So who do we got? Nehemiah King, Henry Lake, and we got Aaron Wright. 1820, we got Henry Lake. Oh, sorry, not Nehemiah Howard. I'm sorry. Nehemiah King, Aaron Wright. Then we have 1823. Nehemiah Howard, Nehemiah King, Henry Lake, Aaron Wright, Nehemiah Howard, Nehemiah King. 1830, Henry Lake, Aaron Wright. 1840 list, Nehemiah Howard, Aaron Wright. Then we got Herwin Lake, maybe it was misspelled as Hiram, which is, I believe, the son of Henry Lake. Then we have 1835, Nehemiah Howard, Henry Lake, Hiram Lake. Aaron Wright. So you see, we got some quite good information there of being corroborated there. Then So this is the son of Henry Lake, and he says, I am 69 years of age and have lived all my life in Conway, Ashtabula County, Ohio. My father, Henry Lake, was partner with Solomon Spalding 1811 1812 in a forge in Conway, then Salem. About 1834, when I was about 23 years of age, I remember there was a great excitement concerning Mormonism in Conway. My father read the Book of Mormon, or heard it read, and was familiar with its contents, and he told me it was unquestionably derived from a manuscript written by his former partner, Solomon Spaulding, called Manuscript Found, or the Lost Tribes. I believe my father about this time made an affidavit to the same effect, which was published. Since 1834, I have conversed with Aaron Wright, John Miller, and Nathan Howard, residents here, now deceased, all of whom lived here in 1811 and 1812, who had heard Spalding's manuscript read, and they told me they believed the Book of Mormon was derived from Spalding's manuscript found. Some or all of these persons made affidavits to this effect, which were published in a book called Mormonism Unveiled, edited by E.D. Howe of Painesville, Ohio, Hiram Lake. I have resided in the neighborhood of Conway, Ashtabula County, Ohio, 66 years. During all that period, I have known Hiram Lake, whose statements given above, dated December 23rd, 1880, I have read. The statement I believe to be true. I was acquainted with Hiram Lake, Aaron Wright, John Miller, Nathan Howard, persons named in Hiram Lake's statement in about 1834-35, at the time of the excitement concerning Mormonism. I heard them all say that the Book of Mormon was undoubtedly taken from a manuscript written by Solomon Spaulding, which they had heard Spalding read in 1811 or 1812, called the Manuscript Found of the Lost Tribes. Lauren Gold. The editor of the Boise City, Idaho Republican, Daniel Bacon, copies Mrs. Davison's account of the Spalding manuscript, which originally appeared in the Boston Recorder in 1839, and adds this corroborative testimony. We spent our early childhood in Springfield, Pennsylvania, only 4 miles from New Salem, where Mr. Spalding wrote the manuscript found and heard the old sailors that were conversant with the facts as stated in this history relate them time and again all through. We never have seen it in print before. We have seen several men who saw and read the original manuscript, and can say that their relation of the facts corresponds in every particular with the history as given by the widow Spalding, and we recognize the names of Lake, Wright, Spalding, and Miller as gentlemen with whom our fathers did business, gentlemen of veracity, and some of them men of wealth. And that was given April 5th, 1879, in the Salt Lake Daily Tribune. June 5th, 1841. The above letter I have obtained in answer to several questions respecting Mormons and Mormonism transmitted by the Reverend Mr. Quinnen to Dr. Holly of this county from you. This letter of Dr. Rosa's, together with the book Mormonism Unveiled, which accompanies it, I send as the best answers to your questions and the best expositions of Mormonism which can be attained. It is believed by candid and respectable people in the vicinity of the Mormon temple that Mr. Howe's book, Mormonism Unveiled, is very correct. As to the opponents in reference to the Spalding manuscript at New Salem, now Conway, I have been acquainted with them for 30 years, excepting Miller, and believe them to be credible and respectable persons. It is indeed astonishing that so low an impostor should ever have been countenanced at all, much more so that hundreds of English converts should recently have come over to it, and that 400 more should now be daily expected to take shipping at Buffalo in order to pass up our lakes to join the Western Mormons. John Hall. Then Mr. Brown attested by his son, I was intimately acquainted with Henry Lake, Oliver Smith, Dr. Nehemiah Howard. They were among our best citizens. I often talked with Lake about Solomon Spaulding's manuscript, years before the Book of Mormon came out. After it came out, he claimed the two were identical. And then Mr. Edwards says, often heard Rigdon preach in 1819 and 1820, fluent speaker. Often heard Henry Lake, Nehemiah Howard, Aaron Wright, who were among the best citizens and held responsible positions, say that Spaulding wrote the history part of the Book of Mormon. Then Payne, he attested by his daughter, no person who knew Cunningham would question the truth of his statements in Howe's book about the Spaulding manuscript. I'm going to go ahead and skip just a little bit here, make it a little bit faster to read. So they Murray Payne testified his daughter, no person who knew Cunningham would question the truth of his statement in Howe's book about the Spalding manuscript. His family was highly respected as any in this part of the state. Gibson wrote in 1884, have read Howe's book on Mormonism and often heard Lake, Howard, and Wright state that Spalding often read his manuscript to his neighbors, and also that the history part of Book of Mormon is the same as that manuscript. I'm going to skip just a little bit here. So Crane knew Cunningham, who was regarded as one of our best citizens. Keys, I have heard nearly all the witnesses whose testimonies in Howe's book, the witness names them, state the same in conversation. They claim that the history part of the Book of Mormon and Spalding's manuscript were the same. All these persons were among our most highly respected citizens. And then J.J. Jackson, minister in good standing in the East Ohio Conference, writes us under the date of February 11th from Cambridge, Ohio, as follows: concerning the Solomon Spalding authorship of a large part of the Book of Mormon, I have had opportunity to know something. I once heard my father say more than once that he had heard Solomon Spalding read from the manuscript found in his own father's Wright house. I was on the Pine River Circuit of the Washington District of the Pittsburgh Conference, West Elizabeth, Allegheny, Pennsylvania, and I was placed in charge of that work in 1864 to 66. My father came for a rather long visit than usual. There was a small body of local Mormons in that place. While my father was with us, I borrowed a copy of the Book of Mormon for him to compare it with his remembrance fully, as he wished to do, and he said of the Book of Mormon with some alterations, and those by no means material, was identical with what he heard Mr. Spalding read. That's found in the Christian Advocate, February 23rd, 1905. T.B. Howard have read the statements of Lake, Smith, and my father, Dr. Nehemiah Howard, in Howe's book, and have often heard them make the same statements in conversation. They said the history part of Spalding's manuscript was the same as Book of Mormon. Taking father, Oliver Smith, came to Springfield, 1798. Well remembers Solomon Spalding, who frequently came to our house, remained several days. There was but few settlers, and the latch string always hung out. Often heard Father Mckee, Dr. Howard, and others talk about Spalding reading his writings years before the Book of Mormon came out. And when the Mormon preacher came along, they all knew Spalding wrote the history part of the Book of Mormon. Haskell. Artemus Cunningham was one of our best neighbors. I after heard him make the same statements about Spalding's manuscript as are contained in Howe's book. That was dated 1884. E.D. Howe. He's the one that published Manuscript Unveiled. So he says, before publishing my book, I went to Conway and saw most of the witnesses who had seen manuscript found and had testified to its identity with the Book of Mormon as published in my book, and was satisfied that they were men of intelligence and respectability and were not mistaken in their statements. So even he himself went and visited personally with these witnesses that Harbert had taken statements from. So when we put all this together, friends, we see that they're present. We also see the case that what do we find out? Are they not corroborated? As you can see, they're definitely present. When we look at the family witnesses, when we look at the conduit witnesses, they definitely are corroborated. We've seen them in history books. We've seen them even attested by others that they are men of respectability and good character. Now we want to look at the Amity, Pennsylvania witnesses. So it says Mr. Miller helped with the casket of Spaulding, and they even have his hatchet they used to construct the casket in possession of Amwell Township Historical Society, in Amity, Pennsylvania. And remember that he said that he helped make the coffin. So that corroborates his statement. We have Mr. Mckee, who says, having already given you the instance which led to my unexpected removal to Amity and intimacy with Mr. Spalding in 1814, I will now parenthetically and briefly remark that I removed from that village in 1816 unexpectedly, under the following circumstances. Mr. Hugh Jelly, senior partner at Pittsburgh, died in the summer of 1816. And knowing that a settlement of the firm's business would be necessary, and having learned all that pertained to the management of a country store, I wrote the surviving partner that I wished to resign as soon as he could find a suitable successor. In about a month, I was relieved by Mr. Douglas, a nephew of Mr. Jelly's, and bidding farewell to Mr. and Mrs. Spaulding, Mr. Miller, and other friends, returned to my old city. I may be pardoned for adding that I was congratulated by my friends on my healthy and improved appearance, and especially on the success of my administration at Amity, which they said was profitable and highly satisfactory to my employers, and creditable to myself. Refraining from any further details of a biographical nature, I will make no mention of the events of my subsequent busy life, but merely remark, with gratitude to the Almighty, that in all my varied experiences and exposures, by flood and field, during the more than 70 years since I lived at Old Amity, a kind of providence has preserved me in good health, free from any serious illness or bodily disaster. And then we have actually Mckee's obituary. Red Mckee, Esquire, well known to many of the older readers of the Banner, died at Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, on Monday evening, September 13th, in the 86th year of his age. His death was sudden and unexpected. A private letter from him of September 9th was received of the Banner office September 11th, relating to work which he had then in contemplation. Mr. Mckee was born December 7th, 1800, at McKeesport, Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, of which time his father was the proprietor and founder. In early life, he was in such delicate health that he was not expected to reach maturity, and for the same reason his school education was limited to about 4 months. His mother, however, well fulfilled at home the office of a teacher. A few years of life on the farm of an uncle so far invigorated his health that in his 12th year he entered the employment of Hugh and James Jelly, who conducted an extensive mercantile business in Pittsburgh. So rapidly did he develop a faculty for business that 2 years afterwards, and while in his 14th year, he was entrusted by his employers with the management of a branch store which they established at Amity, Washington County, Pennsylvania, with a stock of assorted goods amounting to $5,000 or $6,000. Here he remained nearly 2 years, during the whole of which time he boarded with Reverend Solomon Spaulding, whose name has been so often mentioned in connection with the authorship of the Book of Mormon. So, friends, you can see these are corroborated, but we still have 2 more tests to see if whether or not they're reliable eyewitnesses. But as you can see, were they present? Yes. Were they corroborated? Yes. So join me next time as we research further.